folks. Today's topic, I'll be shooting indoors, and I'll talk a bit about our summer favorite drink, which is a bit like a lacto-fermented cordial. It's a fizzy drink that has very little remaining sugar in it, and it's also a probiotic, so it's very good for the gut biome. It's based on ginger, so the most similar thing in the West I've seen is the ginger bug or ginger beer. We make it at home with a few very simple steps, and I want to quickly run through them because today is the day I'll be making our second or maybe third batch for the season. I also have some of the earlier batches here as demonstration of the final thing, of the product that we're looking to get. So you get to see that as well. What we usually start with is a bit of organic ginger we get from the stores, because we haven't been able to grow ginger in a pot here, even though we tried repeatedly. So we get 100 grams of organic ginger, and we grate that. It's not, you don't need to be very fine. And then those 100 grams of grated ginger we put in just a little pot, and add 100 grams of sugar and a cup of water, so it has some moisture in it. And we keep that on the windowsill in a warm place in the kitchen, and in a few days you can see how it starts bubbling. When it starts bubbling, it's an indication that the lactobacillus bacteria that present in the ginger are starting to ferment the sugar. When the ginger has started bubbling, and it will get more active in a few days, this is just a couple of days old, so you'll get like a layer of white foam on top. This means that your starter is ready. What we do is we keep a couple of spoonfuls of the ginger along with the liquid it contains, and the other ginger, which is about like 90 grams, we boil in a 10-liter pot of water to get what could easily be called ginger tea. In that pot of water I have put a kilo of sugar, so you need 10 liters of water and then a liter of sugar. The boiling also sterilizes the water, so if it has any bacteria in it, or if it's chlorinated, it allows the chlorine to off-gas quicker, so nothing will impede the fermentation of the sugars by the ginger and the lactobacteria in it. When this water comes to a boil, I'll turn the heat off and then add the ginger that I just showed you. I have separated now about 90 grams of the grated ginger, which will go into the boiling pot of water to give the flavor. 100 grams are enough if you don't want it to be too peppery, and it won't have an overpowering ginger smell and aroma and taste. We have made different batches with even like double the amount of ginger, but it's just too strong for us. But if you enjoy the ginger taste, feel free to scale the recipe up. This remaining liquid with maybe a spoonful of grated ginger will be enough to use a starter for a 10-liter batch. For the primary fermentation, I use this plastic bottle. It's an 11 bottle 11 liter bottle. It's from mineral water. It's how it's sold here. So after the ginger tea has cooled off to body temperature, I will strain it and put it in this bottle, and there will be a bit of space at the top remaining, and then I'll be adding this starter, and I will cover the top of the bottle with a piece of cotton cloth and some string to keep it clean but allow gases to leave the vessel. One other thing that you can use as a starter, which is not really widely known, is this deep purple, almost black jam looking thing, which is actually the remains of the elder fruit syrup we make each fall. So in the fall, when you gather the elder fruit and you do the sugar and elder fruit in a jar procedure, what you are left with is the actual syrup, which you take as a immune stimulant, and then you also have the mass of the fruit, which have some sugar left in them, but also they seem a bit dehydrated, and you can store that in a jar in your fridge easily for a year. And if you add some of that along with the ginger starter or instead of it, but we usually prefer to do both, it also works, and it really kicks up the fermentation process. And as an added bonus, you get this lovely deep red color to the drink, which is otherwise an off-white color, because the ginger doesn't really impart much color to the water in which it boils. So to sum this up, first you get 100 grams of ginger, grated, add 100 grams of sugar and some water, and wait a few days up to a week to get it bubbling, and your starter is ready. Then you separate part of the starter into a separate bowl. Boil 10 liters of water. Put this separated ginger into the boiling water to make ginger tea. Then after it cools down, you put it in a larger vessel, which can hold the whole amount of the ginger tea. Add the ginger starter, or if you have other type of starters, you can use that as well. I suspect that it could probably work with sourdough starter, but we haven't tried that so far. And then you keep that in a warm place to allow the fermentation to start. Another very interesting aspect of this drink is that it can be done with basically any type of sweet cordial you make during the summer. So strawberries, raspberries, elderflower, red and black currant, any type of small berry fruit that we make into a cordial, also cherries, sour cherries, even apples, and in winter time we make a tea out of rose hips, quince, and hawthorn, and then even some blackthorn. I'll talk about that a bit in another video, probably when it's winter, because it's not something that we do in the summer. But you can have basically any type of fruit cordial, which is sweetened, or fruit tea, which also has sugar added, and start the fermentation in the same way as with the ginger buck. And right here, this is what I wanted to show you. We have this glass jar of 5 liters for smaller batches. You can see here in the jar at the top we have the red currants that are left over from the cordial making. So those currants, they spent a few days in sugar, and then we collected the syrup, which we use as a cordial, diluting it with water. But the fruit, they took some of the sugar in them, and they still have the color and a bit of the flavor left. So we just add some boiled water here. We add a bit more sugar, and we add the fruit, and you can see the lovely color. They make. For this jar, we used another thing to start the fermentation, or for a starter, and what we used was the previous batch of our lacto-fermented ginger drink. We used about 200 milliliters of the previous drink, which is still alive and kicking, as you'll see in a moment, and just added that to the glass jar. And the fact that the fruit bubbling and floating to the top, it's a good indication that fermentation is taking place. My sugary water is now almost boiling, so I'll just add the grated ginger. And when it starts to boil, I'll just turn the heat off and wait it to cool before I pour it in the fermentation vat. So how long does the fermentation take, and when should you bottle the drink? Anyone who's ever made wine or cider or even beer knows all the details you need to know about fermentation. But if you never made any of those things, it's not a problem, because what we're looking here for is not specific amount of alcohol or specific Brix level. What we're finally aiming at is just a slightly sweet fizzy drink, which is also probiotic, as we don't purchase any like sweet sodas or any soda drink or other fizzy drinks in our household. This is what we use as a substitute, and it works really well for us. So what we usually do is, when fermentation starts, like in this jar, we stir it daily, and in a few days the fruits start to settle lower, and the rapid, or as we call it, first fermentation, subdues. So those fruits start to float lower in the volume. And if you don't have fruit, like here we'll have ginger, so there won't be much this much pulp to indicate the process. You see it by the amount of foam you have at the top. And the easiest and, for me, most sure way to work is to just taste the juice that's in the vat or in the jar. When the juice have a bit of sweetness to it, not overly sweet, but not undetectably sweet either, then it's the proper time to put it in bottles. The remaining sugars in the drink will mostly be consumed by the bacteria. So in the end, the longer you wait for the drink to mature, so to speak, or to secondary ferment, the less sweet will be, the more dry, if we can use the wine terminology, and probably the more fizzy. You can see here at the bottom in this bottle those It has like a layer of white dust. It's the residue of the bacteria which are working inside of the bottle. When bottling, it's very important to keep in mind that the bottles become very pressurized, and you can't use just any regular bottle. So, because you risk bursting and property damage and probably injury in cases of glass bottles. I've seen beer capped glass bottles with this stuff explode on a balcony, so I know how violent it can be. So usually we use those PET bottles which are from carbonated water, like regular soda without any taste. Usually we get those for when we have guests and we want to have single servings of cordial, which we mix with the soda water so it becomes fizzy. Of course, we collect the bottles, so we have a few dozen of those. And they are specifically designed to hold pressure because they keep fizzy drink from the start. And the other type I usually prefer to use, but sadly we don't have that many bottles of this type, is the wire cap bottle. They're usually from beers here, which are a bit more expensive, so I rarely allow myself to buy those, but in time I have been able to gather about 20 of those bottles, so 10 liters of ginger tea and fermented exactly fill the 20 bottles I have. And when we make other batches, we just use the plastic bottles, which also work. Those two bottles each have their advantage. Of course, glass is always better. But the main feature of this bottle is that it has this rubber gasket, which acts like a pressure release valve. So if the pressure builds up too much in the bottle, it starts hissing and actually lets some of the gas out. So it's very hard to make those explode under regular conditions. Of course, if you put them in the direct sunlight in a 40 degrees day, they'll probably just burst open, the caps flip open, and yeah. And those bottles, they are better because they're easier to uh, open slowly and let out some of the pressure in a controlled fashion. Because if you don't pre-chill in the refrigerator those drinks, they can be very fizzy and very carbonated. I've had bottles like that opened quickly like a champagne, and 80% of the volume of the drink just fly out as foam. So it's always better to chill those to about 2 or 3 to 5 degrees in the fridge for overnight before opening. And now I will try to carefully open one of the bottles, so even though it's not super chilled to a proper temperature, just to show you how fizzy the actual drink is. I usually start by, you can hear the air coming out and see the bubbles start forming. I usually start by just slowly turning the cap to let some of the built up pressure. You can see it's actively foaming. So that's how it behaves. This batch needs about a week or maybe 10 days more to be fully ready to our standards, because the drink is still a bit too sweet for my personal taste. But it's very, very refreshing. It has a great taste, and because for this specific batch we used the mix of ginger and elder fruit starter, we kept the ginger taste, but also got the lovely color and some fruitiness from the elder fruit, which we used to speed up the fermentation and also get a bit of a different batch. For the glass bottles, it could be a bit harder. I usually try to be extra careful because I don't want to repaint the living room ceiling again. It could easily go up a couple of meters if it's very active and it's a warm day and the bottle is warm. So I usually press the top of the cup with my palm and have a cup ready. So if I sense a bigger pressure here, I can regulate that with the pressure I put on top, and then slowly let it out and be able to pour in a glass. While I'm enjoying my drink here in the garden, I wanted to take just a minute to talk about the economics of making this lacto-fermented and probiotic drink. With the recipe that we found, it works for ourselves. We get about 20 bottles, one of those 50 milliliter bottles, out of the 10-liter batch that we make. So the expense for those 20 bottles is 100 grams of organic ginger, which even at say 20 or 30 euro per kilogram, it's just a couple of euro. And then you have a kilo of sugar, which is also not vastly expensive, 10 liters of water, which even if you buy are not too much, and the heat you need to make the water boil. So when you divide that by 20, the actual price of each individual bottle is very, very, very low. First of all, we don't have a similar product here, so there's nothing to compare on the market, and it's basically impossible to get that from the market because it's a living product, which means that it's not shelf stable, and you can't actually offer it in a store. And even if you could, the prices of sugary drinks with added probiotics, massive quotes around that inside, are usually much higher, order of magnitude higher. I think that our drink comes down to less than 50 euro cents per bottle, and the cheapest similar drink I've seen was like 3 or 4 euros. And especially if you have an excess fruit like those mulberries here, which you can see have made mulch on the ground. There's so many falling from the wind and the birds going up in the tree to eat, or maybe the currants that we picked, or whatever fruit you may have in excess, and you process it in any way that you are left with the pulp. You also get the added bonus of a specific flavor, so you get different flavored probiotic drinks. So I'd say it's a very nice recipe, and if you enjoy the flavor, it's a nice thing to have in your arsenal, because it's not only delicious and very refreshing in the heat of the summer, but it's also very healthy, and we definitely feel the benefits, and we miss the summer for precisely the taste and the freshness that it brings. The black currants, which I showed you in more detail in a previous video, the following small fruit that we must pick next week before the end of it. And even though it has very low fruit set this year, I still expect to be able to pick about a couple of kilos. So we'll be making cordial of that as well, and we'll freeze some. But the leftovers from the cordial will be passing the same route as the red currant ones. So we'll be making them into a ginger bug fermented drink as well. And if I'm able, I'll try to shoot that from start to finish so you can see the whole process. That's it from me for this episode, and cheers.